Okay. So the railroads were hauling things back and forth. So
Well,
that was the new trade
economy
route.
started to move in 1939, and of course Pappy was then 39 and
1939. Here we go. This is why I did this, so we didn't
yeah.
have to keep. Except it's 1 year off. He was 44.
What was? He
And
had been 44.
He had been 44.
And it was becoming a chore. He had troubles with boils, and they don't. I think it was from when they were driving these rivets, like I explained to you how they were driven. There would be a shale of that come off, and that would fly in their clothing and burn holes in their clothing and go into their skin.
Wow.
And I guess many of the times the box was already on the frame of the thing when he was down underneath there driving those rivets. And that became a very hard job.
Oh yeah, hitting that all day long?
Right, and that's
just the impact to the body.
Well, you've seen an air hammer going up and down.
Yeah, like a jackhammer.
That's exactly what it was, but this was small enough you held it in your hands. And of course, if they made a mistake on it or the cap wasn't just correct, they had to take that out and put another one in. But he just decided he could run the farm himself with Jim. Well, Jim and I, the three of us were still home.
So when he was at the railroad or off and on, he was running the farm on the side, or did he have hired help?
Well, we had some hired help at times. Now, I told you about the Frys. That Mr. Fry, when Pappy was first called back to work, he wasn't employed. He worked at a shoe factory. And he did many little jobs, but we had an old apple tree that was down in the field. It was non-productive. It was half dead. And he asked my father if he could saw that down. And they used something like that in making shoes back then. And these little things looked like Pappy's rivets that were made out of metal to drive the
little pegs.
Bullets. But they wanted apple wood because it was so much stronger. And so he cut that down, and he had a lathe, and he made them for the company he worked for. And of course the wood didn't cost him anything, it was only his time, and they paid him. But he worked for us for every day, well, not Sundays. And I don't think Saturday, unless it was harvest time or something like that. But Pappy paid him $1 a day. Now he had 2 children. But now they did get their milk with that, and eggs. And when we butchered meat. And of course, they appreciated it very much. And of course, they remained friends. And then their oldest daughter married the minister that buried Grandma, this Brown.
That buried Sarah Jane.
No, married
Mimi?
Mimi. She was a few years younger than I, but Brown was his name, and he. Well, after Mr. Fry died, my parents respected the Frys as much as the Frys respected my parents, but her mother came to live with him, and she would come and help Mimi take her plants in and replant them in the fall when she lived with them. And she'd come over and help Mimi do things. And of course, Louise is the one that called me on the phone when Mimi passed away. So anyhow, she said, Claire, of course I recognized her voice. She said, I have bad news. And I said, well, which one was it? And she said, your mother. Because I wasn't sure. Pappy was not that great of health either at that time. But anyhow, Pappy could have made more money, but he just would not give in to selling any of the things that were necessary to run the farm off the farm. And of course, the last couple of years that he farmed, he employed a classmate of mine from grade school, Laverne, oh, can't think of his second name now, last name.
But when did they end up selling the farm?
In the 70s. You were born in 57. I think it was the early 70s.
Do you remember the story about him? A story about Larry wanting to buy the farm, and Larry thought to get a lawyer, and Pappy said, "No, sir. We'll sell it on a handshake."
Oh no, that was somebody else. That was John, not the man who bought it.